Let me start with a narrative. There was a young sportsman, a runner, who practiced every dawn at daybreak, regardless of the weather, day in and day out. He wasn't the quickest, not yet, but he was persistent. He trained with a fervor that stemmed not from rivalry, but from belief. One morning he strained a muscle mid-stride. The ache was sharp, sudden. You could see it on his face, but he didn't halt. He decelerated. He modified his pace, but he kept going. Later, someone inquired, "Why didn't you stop when it pained?" He uttered something so straightforward, it lingered with me. Because the ache was genuine, but halting wouldn't have aided. The race doesn't pause. We are informed in life that displaying sentiment makes us authentic. And that's accurate. But we frequently confuse displaying sentiment with yielding to it. There is a distinction between feeling wounded and allowing that wound to dictate your conduct. That distinction is crucial. To behave as if nothing wounds you doesn't imply you reject pain, stifle it, or feign its non-existence. It implies you learn to confront your pain without permitting it to govern your choices. It implies you've comprehended something profound. Pain is data, not character. Reflect on this. How many of us were instructed to react instantly when we're wounded? Someone utters something unkind and we retaliate. A setback humiliates us and we withdraw. A companion betrays us and we seclude ourselves. The world educates us that pain validates reaction. But it doesn't educate us that pain, when handled with sagacity, can evolve into our greatest catalyst for development. There's a significant discipline in learning to halt when it aches. Not to suppress, but to observe. Because when you halt, you get to pose the superior question, what is this pain attempting to instruct me? Instead of why me, you commence inquiring what now? I've conversed with leaders who've had to make unfeasible choices amidst heartache. Executives who've had to declare redundancies to individuals they cherish. Innovators whose enterprises collapsed after years of toil and sacrifice. They don't enter those instances untouched by pain. They enter having opted how to bear it. You can discern the contrast. Some disintegrate in turmoil, others become resolute, not because it doesn't ache, but because they grasp that the reaction is where leadership resides. Envision if every instance you were wounded, you acted from the injury. Every disagreement, every letdown, every failure, you permitted it to represent you. What kind of existence would that construct? What kind of leader would that shape you into? Now envision this. Every instance life delivered a blow, you sensed it, but you didn't recoil. You stood firm, not because you're insensible, but because you've honed your reaction. You've instructed yourself that pain is not the ultimate verdict, that self-governance is more potent than self-expression in moments of crisis. There's a quotation I once heard that never departed from me. He who is tardy to anger is superior to the valiant. It's not about frailty or muteness. It's about fortitude under restraint. The capacity to feel everything and yet still make the correct choice. That's authentic power. The obstacle is, we inhabit a world that compensates reaction. We peruse through highlight reels of individuals reacting, erupting, breaking down, denouncing. The most boisterous emotion garners the most notice. But the most impactful individuals I've ever encountered, those who lead, motivate, instigate, change. They are tranquil in their tempest. They bear their pain with grace. They don't conceal it, but they don't relinquish the microphone to it either. I once collaborated with a woman who lost a family member unexpectedly and still appeared to conduct a meeting the following day. Not because she was obligated to, but because she opted to. I queried her later why she didn't cancel. She replied, "Because I needed to remind myself that I can be both pained and beneficial, that I can be present for others even while I'm recuperating." That's it right there. The fortitude isn't in feigning everything is fine. It's in acknowledging that even when everything isn't fine, you're still capable. You're still precious. You're still here. And that's significant. If we aspire to be leaders, not just in corporations, but in families and friendships, in life we must master the craft of responding, not reacting. The potency of pause, the valor to remain composed when chaos beckons. Because the world doesn't require more individuals who detonate when they're in pain. It requires more individuals who can feel profoundly but lead sagaciously. When you behave as if nothing wounds you, what you're truly doing is proclaiming that you are more than your circumstances. You're declining to let transient pain make enduring decisions. You're opting for composure not because you're frigid, but because you're lucid. Clarity in pain is uncommon, but it can be cultivated. It commences with minor choices. The next instance someone insults you, don't retaliate. Inhale. The next instance you fail, don't conceal, contemplate. The next instance you're disheartened, don't seclude, participate. These are the minuscule triumphs that over time construct an unassailable presence. And one day, someone will inquire, how do you remain so composed? Doesn't this ache? And you'll grin, not because it doesn't ache, but because you've learned the verity. Pain is part of the process, but it doesn't get to be the captain. You'll have evolved into the individual who behaves as if nothing wounds, not to impress others, but to remain connected to purpose. Because pain doesn't vanish, but how you bear it can alter everything. There's an instant in every leader's expedition when they realize something that transforms everything. Individuals aren't searching for someone impeccable. They're searching for someone steadfast. We frequently believe we must be flawless to be esteemed, that we must never exhibit frailty, never err, never confess when we're incorrect. We conduct ourselves like polished statues, aspiring that if we just appear invulnerable enough, others will follow us. But that's not how authentic trust is constructed. And that's not how leadership operates. And let me inform you about a man I encountered years ago. He was a project supervisor in a medium-sized company. Not someone renowned, not someone in the limelight, but the instant you entered the room, you sensed his presence. His team would traverse barriers for him. You could perceive it in how they discussed him, how they inclined when he spoke. I once queried one of his team members, what makes him so exceptional? And the response was uncomplicated. He never feigns perfection. But when things go awry, he never vanishes, he remains, he leads. We trust him because we know he'll never flee from the fire. That's the kind of fortitude individuals follow. It's not boisterous, it's not conceited, it doesn't seek to impress. It simply appears when it's most crucial. We've been sold a version of leadership that resembles a movie poster more than a human being. Flawless, unshaken, always correct. And we ponder why so many individuals feel they're not suited to lead. The reality is, leadership is not about being the most intelligent individual in the room. It's not about possessing all the responses. It's about being the tranquility in the tempest, the steady hand when things disintegrate. That's fortitude. And it's far more captivating than perfection. The reason individuals follow fortitude is because life is uncertain. Plans crumble, individuals depart, numbers fall short. And in those instances, we're all searching for someone who won't disintegrate. Not someone who's never failed, but someone who knows how to persist through failure. Reflect on the instances in your life when you felt truly secure around someone. I'm willing to wager it wasn't because they had impeccable credentials or a flawless track record. It was probably because even in chaos, they were grounded. They didn't panic, they didn't feign, everything was fine. They simply maintained their ground. And by doing so, they granted you permission to do the same. Perfection is intimidating, it creates distance. But fortitude, authentic fortitude, creates connection. It's not uncommon to hear a leader say, I don't want my team to see me struggling. But that's not fortitude. That's fear donning a mask. True fortitude says, yes, this is arduous. Yes, I'm stretched, but I'm still here and I'm still in this with you. Individuals don't follow perfection. They follow presence. They follow someone who's committed to them, not just when it's effortless, but especially when it's challenging. I once collaborated with a founder whose startup endured a brutal phase. Sales plummeted, investors withdrew, and morale hit rock bottom. Everyone anticipated him to enter with some grand solution. He didn't. He entered, gazed his team in the eye, and stated, I don't have all the responses, but I'm not departing. We're going to resolve this collectively. That solitary statement accomplished more than any spreadsheet or strategy session ever could. Because in that instant, his team didn't require a genius. They required someone they could rely on. And that's who he opted to be. When we pursue perfection, we generate pressure. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. We establish a tone that implies mistakes are unacceptable, vulnerability is frailty, and requesting assistance is a flaw. And then we ponder why our teams feel anxious, why individuals burn out, why innovation perishes. Fortitude accomplishes the opposite. Fortitude generates safety. It generates a space where individuals feel acknowledged, where they know it's acceptable to speak up, to admit uncertainty, to attempt and fail. And that kind of environment, that's where creativity thrives. That's where authentic loyalty commences. Not because you're perfect, but because you're human and dependable. There's another stratum to this too. Individuals follow fortitude because it demonstrates what's feasible. When you remain grounded through adversity, when you assume responsibility instead of assigning blame, when you opt for consistency over charisma, that evolves into a blueprint for others. It grants them permission to ascend to their own fortitude, not by imitating you, but by discovering the courage to be steadfast themselves. And here's something no one informs you early on. Being strong doesn't imply being the strongest. It doesn't imply you never disintegrate, never weep, never request assistance. It simply implies you continue to appear. You assume ownership. You construct trust with actions, not just words. Fortitude is discovered in the leader who listens when others shout, in the parent who remains composed when the children lose control, in the companion who listens first in a disagreement instead of attempting to triumph. These instances matter because in those instances you model something potent, that we are not governed by emotion. We are guided by intention. Individuals don't recall every word we utter, but they recall how they felt around us. They recall whether they felt secure, whether they felt acknowledged, whether they felt respected. And composure is often the reason for that sensation. But here's the reality. It's arduous. Remaining composed when you're frustrated, wounded, disrespected, overlooked, that necessitates incredible fortitude. And it's not about being emotionless. It's about being emotionally intelligent, knowing when to speak, when to maintain silence, when to stand firm, and when to release. And sometimes composure implies departing, not out of frailty, but out of wisdom, because not every battle is worthy of your tranquility, and not every provocation merits your energy. The more composed you become, the more control you attain, not over others, but over yourself. And that's the kind of control that alters things. Because when you're no longer easily shaken, you become the individual others turn to. You become the one who leads, not because of position, but because of presence. If there's one thing we can all practice every day, it's this: the pause before we speak. Pause. Before we react, pause. Before we decide, pause. That pause is the space where composure resides. And in that space, we get to opt who we aspire to be. So when the instant arrives, and it will, when everything feels urgent and emotions escalate, remember your fortitude is not demonstrated by your volume. It's demonstrated by your poise. You don't need to triumph in the instant. You need to possess it. Control isn't about wielding power over others. It's about wielding power over yourself. And that kind of control, it commences with composure. Every instance you react to something, you're conveying a message. Whether you realize it or not, you're instructing the individuals around you what you're willing to accept, what you esteem, and most importantly, how they're permitted to treat you. It's not about being manipulative. It's about being intentional. You see, we don't just inhabit a world that responds to who we are. We inhabit a world that mirrors how we behave. And your reactions are often the clearest signals you transmit. Reflect on someone you respect profoundly, not just for what they accomplish, but for how they conduct themselves. I'd wager their fortitude isn't just in their skills, it's in how they maintain their ground when challenged. It's in how they opt not to retaliate when provoked. It's in how they establish boundaries, not with anger, but with clarity. That's not fortune, that's not personality, that's discipline. That's instructing the world how to treat you. A companion once informed me about a superior she had early in her career. Brilliant individual, respected by the entire company. But more than that, he possessed this quiet power. No one elevated their voice in meetings, not because they were apprehensive, but because he didn't. No one gossiped around him, not because it was a regulation, but because he didn't participate in it. He established a standard, and individuals ascended to it without ever demanding respect. He earned it, not through control, but through consistency. That's the essence of it. Individuals learn from how you respond, not from what you demand. If someone transgresses a boundary and you laugh it off consciously or not, you're indicating the boundary didn't matter. If you continue to appear for individuals who never appear for you without ever having the difficult conversation, you're indicating this is acceptable. And if you detonate every instance something doesn't go your way, you're providing others the manual on how to control you. The world interprets your behavior far more than it hears your words. And we've all been culpable of transmitting the incorrect message. We remain silent when we should speak up. We overreact when we should inhale. We tolerate when we should instruct. But here's the positive news. Just as we've instructed individuals how to treat us through past reactions, we can retrain them by altering how we respond moving forward. It commences by recognizing that every interaction is an opportunity. Every instant someone interrupts you, criticizes you unfairly, disrespects your time, you have a chance to either reinforce the behavior or reset the expectation. And no, resetting the expectation doesn't imply yelling or shaming or creating distance. Often it simply appears as calm clarity. I don't appreciate being addressed in that manner. This isn't a conversation I'm willing to have if it's going to proceed in that direction. I value our relationship too much to permit this pattern to continue. Simple, direct, composed. These aren't power plays. They're principle. And the individuals around you, they notice, they adjust. Boundaries don't need to be loud to be respected. They just need to be clear and consistent. Because the instant individuals perceive you're willing to abandon your own standards just to evade discomfort, they cease trusting those standards altogether. Not because they're cruel or manipulative, but because we've demonstrated that our values are negotiable under pressure. That when you respond from a place of grounded intention, especially in uncomfortable instances, you instruct the world your integrity is not up for negotiation. I once coached a young professional who struggled with being taken seriously in meetings. She was competent, intelligent, and worked harder than most. But she informed me, individuals keep interrupting me. They converse over me. It's as if I'm not even in the room. And we delved into it, and what we discovered was this. Every instant someone interrupted her, she permitted it. Every instant someone dismissed her idea, she smiled politely and proceeded. She didn't push back. Not because she lacked fortitude, but because she believed silence was the high road. Here's what altered. The next instance, someone interrupted her. She gently stated, "I'd like to conclude my point if that's acceptable." That's it. One sentence. But everything shifted. Not because of the sentence, but because of what it represented. And she commenced instructing the room how to treat her by how she reacted. Respect is often less about being liked and more about being clear. And when you commence opting for reactions that reflect who you aspire to be, rather than what the instant provokes, individuals commence aligning to your example. Now, let's be candid, this isn't always effortless. Sometimes it's easier to evade the instant, to permit things to slide, to retreat instead of confront. But in doing so, we're not safeguarding peace. We're just postponing discomfort. And discomfort doesn't dissolve on its own. It grows, it festers, and eventually it speaks for us in ways we can't control, but through burnout, resentment, withdrawal. So instead, opt to speak when it's most challenging. Opt to model the kind of respect you expect. Opt to respond not just with emotion, but with intention. Because every reaction you provide is either an invitation or a boundary. An invitation for individuals to continue doing what they're doing, or a boundary that states, this is who I am and this is what I esteem. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to get it right every instance. But you do need to be aware and you do need to be consistent, because the world learns from what you tolerate, and you are the first instructor. So if you aspire to be treated with respect, speak with it. If you aspire to be surrounded by honesty, live it. If you aspire for individuals to handle you with care, demonstrate them how through the way you handle yourself, you instruct the world how to treat you. Not by elevating your voice, but by elevating your standards. Not by demanding better, but by being better. And the instant you realize that your reactions aren't just personal, they're instructional, is the instant you commence living not at the mercy of the world, but in partnership with it. When things disintegrate, most individuals search for someone who can maintain composure. In chaos, we believe we need louder voices, swifter action, grander gestures. But what individuals truly crave in the midst of a storm is someone who remains calm, someone who decelerates the instant, someone who brings clarity, not confusion. Remaining calm doesn't imply you don't care. It doesn't imply you aren't feeling the pressure or the weight of responsibility. It implies you've learned to bear that weight without permitting it to crush the individuals around you. That's authentic power. The capacity to regulate yourself when everything else is spiraling out of control. We've all witnessed it. When pressure strikes, many individuals commence to unravel. Voices escalate, tempers flare, fingers point. And beneath all of that noise is often fear. Fear of being blamed, fear of losing control, fear of not possessing the answer. But the ones who make a lasting difference in those instances are the ones who resist that chaos. They don't disregard it, they just don't become it. I once observed a leader enter a room moments after her team had just lost a major client. Individuals were panicking. Some were angry. Others were attempting to explain what transpired, scrambling for solutions. She uttered nothing at first. She just listened. Then she calmly stated, "Okay, let's commence with what we know. Let's resolve this collectively." The instant she spoke, the energy in the room shifted. Not because she possessed a magical answer, but because her presence created space. Her calm became their calm. And that's the kind of influence that doesn't necessitate a title to be felt. We don't ascend to the level of our emotions in chaos. We ascend to the level of our training. And if we haven't trained ourselves to remain grounded, to inhale, to decelerate, we'll be swept away by every unexpected wave. But when we construct that discipline, when we opt for presence over panic, we earn the kind of respect that can't be purchased or demanded. It's felt. The reality is, anyone can be composed when things are going well. It's effortless to be gracious when you're triumphant. It's effortless to be generous when you have more than enough. But who are you when it's disintegrating? That's the test. That's where your leadership is revealed. Not constructed, but revealed. And in that space, calm is not a luxury. It's a necessity. There's a misconception that calmness is passive, that it's weak, that it's doing nothing. But calmness is incredibly active. It necessitates effort to remain steady. When adrenaline is pushing you to act swiftly, it necessitates awareness to be thoughtful when everything in you desires to react. And it necessitates humility to admit you don't possess the answer while still maintaining the confidence to guide others forward. Individuals recall how you made them feel when things were arduous. They recall whether your presence brought peace or pressure. They recall whether you added to the noise or became a source of clarity. And here's the thing about calmness. It's contagious. Just like panic spreads, so does calm. When one individual remains grounded, others commence to find their footing, too. It's like the eye of the storm. Everything around it is swirling and dangerous, but in the center, there's stillness. That stillness doesn't halt the storm, but it provides individuals a place to catch their breath, to think, to opt their next step with intention. You don't need to be the loudest individual in the room. You just need to be the most stable. That's authentic power, the kind that doesn't draw attention to itself, but alters everything around it. Sometimes being calm implies not reacting immediately. It implies pausing before replying to the email that upset you. It implies listening before interrupting. It implies taking a walk instead of launching into an argument. It implies safeguarding your peace, not as an escape, but as a strategy. Because when you lose your calm, you often lose your clarity. And when you lose clarity, you cease leading and commence reacting. You become part of the chaos instead of the solution to it. The best decisions are rarely made in a state of panic. They're made when we step back, zoom out, and re-engage with purpose. Calmness provides you that space. It creates room for wisdom to rise, for perspective to form, for connection to deepen. And it doesn't imply you're emotionless. It implies your emotions don't possess you. In personal relationships, remaining calm helps you safeguard what matters. You don't need to prove your point with volume. You don't need to triumph in the argument with force. Calmness invites trust. It grants others permission to be honest without fear. It makes difficult conversations possible. And in that space, growth transpires. In professional settings, calm leaders construct strong culture. They attract loyalty because individuals know they won't be thrown under the bus when something goes awry. They earn trust because they don't overreact to every change. They empower others because they don't create fear, they create focus. The world doesn't need more individuals who can yell louder. It needs more individuals who can remain quiet long enough to hear what's truly transpiring. It needs individuals who can walk into the fire without becoming it. Individuals who don't make decisions just to feel in control, but who remain steady until the correct decision becomes clear. That's the kind of power we need more of. Not performative strength, but practiced calm. Not forceful dominance, but earned trust. Not control over others, but command over self. You can't control the chaos, but you can control your presence in it. And when you do, you alter the way others appear too. So when the storm strikes, and it will, you get to decide who you're going to be. Are you going to react like everyone else? Or are you going to be the one who remains calm, remains grounded, and leads not by force, but by example? Because authentic power isn't in controlling the world, it's in controlling yourself.